I was always a daddy's girl growing up. My dad and I did everything together, but it got to me to end up calling a stranger to our home just to get back at my stepmother. I can't remember exactly how my family imploded, but my mom found out my dad was having an affair with this woman, Helen. Then my dad left my mom for Helen. Then, worst of all, he proposed to Helen before the divorce was even finalized. I was devastated. I knew I would never really trust my father again. I convinced myself that Helen had manipulated my dad. He never would have done this to my mom and me if she hadn't sunk her claws into him. I hated her with every fiber of my being. I looked forward to the moment my dad would ask me to live with him after the divorce. I imagined all the ways I would tell him no, that he was a liar, and I wouldn't live with him for $1 million. But he never asked, just accepted a custody deal where he got me every other weekend. I was stunned and so hurt. He didn't even want me? He would rather have Helen than his own daughter? My first few visits to his new house were awful. Being in the same room as Helen made me see red. She was loud, annoying, and took up all my dad's attention. She would talk about all the bad Tinder dates she'd been on before she'd finally met my dad at the grocery store. Like meeting a married guy and stealing him away from his family was cute. I wanted to find a way to get my dad to break up with her and go back to being my dad. I was talking to my friend about the situation, and she had a great idea. She said I should reactivate Helen's Tinder profile and convince my dad she was unfaithful. That seemed like a great way to both get back at my dad and to get Helen out of the picture. Getting into Helen's Tinder account wasn't hard. I knew her email, and she's the kind of person who uses the word password as her password. I made a few updates to her profile, posted some new pictures, and voila! Within minutes, she was getting messages from guys, which I replied to. There was one guy, Bill, who really took a shining to Helen. I thought it was hilarious to flirt with him. He lived alone and seemed like a total weirdo. He wanted to meet in person, but I kept telling him I wasn't ready yet. He said he understood, and he kept pouring out his soul to me. He said he felt like we were soulmates. I tried not to crack up. I felt like a spy. My friend asked why I kept checking my phone at lunch. I told her I was Tinder flirting with Bill, and she was like, okay, but weren't you just going to use this as a way to get your dad to break up with Helen? I mean, technically now you're catfishing. It was your idea, I told her, a little hurt. I know, she said, but you seem to be taking it really far. Whatever. I loved this. Soon I would make sure to leave Helen's Tinder profile on the computer for my dad to discover. But one day, I logged on and I had a new message from Bill. If I don't meet you in person, I'm going to die, he said. I messaged back trying to make light of it, saying that I really needed to get to know somebody before I met with them. He replied, I'm across the street from you right now, LOL. I freaked out. Was he serious? What are you talking about? I asked. He said, I did some research and I figured out where you live. Don't be afraid of your feelings, Helen. I need to see your beautiful face in person. Then I really freaked. Was he a serial killer? What had I done? And how was I going to fix this without my dad finding out? I peeked out the window. There was a car idling across the street. Heart pounding, I messaged Bill that I didn't want to talk anymore. If you break up with me, he wrote back, I'll hurt myself. He couldn't be serious. We didn't even know each other. We weren't dating. We never even met in person. But I realized that this guy was actually crazy enough to do something terrible. I thought about calling my friend and asking advice, but I was still kind of hurt by her accusing me of catfishing. Bill said, I'm going to come to your door unless you tell me not to. But if you tell me not to, maybe life isn't worth living. I told myself to just tell him not to. His mental illness wasn't my problem, but what if he really did something to himself and all because I had played a prank on him? It's over, I wrote. Don't contact me again. Too late, he answered. I started having a panic attack. My dad came in and found me shaking and in tears and asked what was wrong. I didn't want to tell him, but somehow the whole story came pouring out. He immediately went outside. I went to the window and saw him beside the car parked on the street. He was shouting at the driver, then trying to reach into the window. The car sped off, tires squealing. Dad stormed back in. Was that Bill? I asked. What did you do to him? I told him never to show his face anywhere near my house again. He whirled on me. Do you have any idea what you've done? How dangerous that was? What if he had tried to hurt you, or me, or Helen? I'd briefly ever heard my dad yell before, and definitely not at me. I didn't know what to say. Helen came in then and demanded to know what was going on. "Tell her," said my dad. I was so humiliated and scared I couldn't speak. My dad finally got on the computer and pulled up Tinder, told me to log in. I did. Helen saw the profile that I had updated for her. She looked at the messages that I had sent to men. Then she straightened and told my dad she was going to stay with her mother. My dad demanded to know why, and she said she was not going to marry a man who had such a horrible daughter. I was so hurt and so angry. I knew that what I had done was wrong, but she was the one who had wrecked my family. I shouted at her. I don't even remember what I said. That's how upset I was. All I remember is that I ended up in my room crying into my pillow, and I heard Helen slam the front door and her car pull away. When I finally emerged from my room the next day, I was scared that my dad would still be furious, but he mostly just seemed tired. Without Helen around, he acted more like the dad I knew. "How could you do that?" was all he said. "She took you away from Mom. She ruined our family. She's mean to me and I hate her. I miss you. And I hate how you like her better than me." I knew I sounded like a spoiled brat, but it was how I felt. To my surprise, my dad stood and hugged me. "I don't think I realized how much you were hurting," he said. "I didn't want to think about how my actions might have affected you. She just makes me happy." I told him I thought Mom had made him happy. He said people change. After that day, I waited. I kept expecting Helen every weekend I was at my dad's. She stayed gone. No word from my dad about where she was or what was happening between them. Finally, I gathered my courage and asked him. He said he and Helen weren't going to get married after all. He said I was his first priority, not Helen. I was in shock. I should have been so excited, but I felt guilty instead. Over the next few days, guilt continued to shadow me. My friend was excited, singing "Ding dong, the witch is dead" and stuff. But I knew the truth, that I'd taken away my dad's happiness. What if he resented me forever? But I couldn't make myself apologize. Couldn't make myself tell him he could marry Helen if he wanted. Instead, I slipped into a new Helen-free life, and I enjoyed it so much. Without her around, my dad actually wanted to go out to do things we both liked. He felt like my dad again. But one day, I came home to find Helen in the living room. I was shocked, but then angry. My dad took me aside and said that he and Helen were getting back together. I went numb. I asked if I could go to my mom's house, but my dad said no, I had to stay here and talk. He explained that Helen was who he'd chosen, and I'd have to learn to be okay with that. Okay with the woman who called me his horrible daughter? No way! I started for the door. He asked me where I was going, and I told him that I was going to live with my mother full time. "I'll talk to her," Helen told him as she followed me to my room. I felt disgusted as I heard her walking to my room. "I want to talk to you, honey," she said with her ugly voice as she opened the door and let herself in. But suddenly her facial expressions changed and her tone became very harsh. "Listen, you brat," she screamed. "You might not like me, and trust me, I don't like you either. But know that if you ever mess up my relationship again, I will mess up your life." And with that, she left my room without even giving me a chance to argue. I wanted to cry. How the hell did I end up having this witch as a stepmother? Of course, none of her threats were going to scare or stop me. I wasn't going to give up and just let her take my mother's place. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual because I wanted to get my coffee and breakfast before Helen woke up. To my luck, I found her standing in the kitchen making herself coffee. She said good morning, but I didn't reply, and I went ahead to make my own coffee. But she didn't let it go. I said, "Good morning, you brat," as she blocked my way to the coffee machine and took my empty cup. "No coffee for you this morning, dear." I couldn't believe she was acting like this. I leaned over quickly to take my cup from her, but she moved her hand fast and the cup fell on the floor and broke into pieces. With all this noise, my father hurried to the kitchen and asked what was happening. When he came in, Helen looked at him and cried, "She tried to throw glass at me!" I looked at my father as I was shaking my head and told him that it wasn't true. But instead of believing me, he asked me to go to my room. I went to my room crying, feeling abandoned by my dad. However, after 2 hours had passed, I was shocked to hear Helen leaving the house with her stuff, and then my dad came in and told me that he heard what happened in the kitchen and that he was sorry. Did you like my story? Please let me know if you've been through something similar. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more.